It's no news to any of you that there's an enormous tension in the West as I've experienced it. And just on this tour alone, I've been in 6 countries, and all of them would constitute Western countries. And these things are maddeningly similar in a way that Walmart and IKEA are maddeningly similar, no matter where you go. Not a sign that we're getting it straight, really. And one of the things that you see the tension rising around is the understanding of whether humans are born or whether they're made. Whether they're an inevitable occurrence of 2 other humans, performing the horizontal mambo, and then 9 months later, there you are, inevitably perfectly human, or whether there's an enormous degree of cultural labor that's exerted over the brow of, first of all, newborn, well, even before then, and then newborns, and then walking for the first time, and then, the onset of puberty is the most obvious one, I guess. And the word initiation, the word means what? It means to begin. Well, okay, if something's beginning at puberty, the only way it can begin is to introduce a proper end to everything that preceded it. Otherwise, it's not a beginning, it's an extension. And that's not just a spatial observation, that's an observation of fundamentally of kind, And it seems to me that those places that are still in the act of understanding culture as something that needs ongoing maintenance and renewal and revivification are the ones that happen to have a lot of initiatory practices that are sprinkled throughout the lifespan, not just at puberty. And in fact, it's a kind of dire thing that the one around puberty is receiving so much attention to the exclusion of all the other ones. That whispers to you a lot. I would submit to you that the over-focus on the puberty initiation is a signal that the instinct to do such a thing is coming from a ceremonial impoverishment and not from a great deal of tutelage and time in on this matter. Because the ones that are being ignored in favor of this one, it's very telling which ones are being ignored. And the last book I wrote about elderhood was an attempt to draw some attention to that rite of passage, which is virtually non-existent. I mean, it's usually called retirement, which is not a good recipe for engagement. See? So if humans are made and not born, which I submit to you, I think that's every indigenous culture on the planet is predicated on that cultural fact and requirement. Then it's the obligation of the village, obviously, if there still is a village, to conduct itself as if it has enormous responsibility for the near future. See? So now I'll go back to that serum story. So I'm listening to the radio years later, and there's a guy, you probably know his name, I've forgotten it now. He wrote a big bestseller called, I think, Sapiens. And of course, A Brief History of Humanity. Who needs a brief history of humanity? I ask you. Like, if you don't have time for the history of humanity, why should you be catered to? Because your attention span's no good for the subject. You know what I mean? Like, just ask things of people for a change, instead of rewarding them for going, I just don't care after 6 pages, you know what I mean? Obviously, I was born in the wrong time. So, anyway, he came up with a sequel to it, which you probably know the name, I've forgotten now, but it's like the near future. That's what he's written about. And so I'm listening to him being interviewed on the radio at home. And he goes, interview dude asks him, so what do you see coming in the near future? He said, it's going to sound like science fiction to you. And he said, but I assure you they're working on it right as we speak. And he said, it's probably too late for you, he said. No, this is true. It's like verbatim. Probably too late for you, but it's coming online within a generation or 2. I don't want to phone in and say, I could do this interview. I could do it. I haven't even read the book or written it, but I'm qualified on this one. He said, but they're working on a serum. You take the serum, you won't have to die. Exactly the same quote. This is from a dude who's written a bestseller that everybody's lapped up across the Western world. It's 26 languages. that's telling us about our collective past and made it user-friendly. And he buys into the notion that dying is what happens to you. Dying is what's inflicted upon you. Dying is something you absolutely no any allegiance to at all. Right? That you're the victim of your limitations and your frailties and your endings. Hook, line, and sinker. That's what's coming out of this guy. So what's your point before I finish the story? My point is, if you're gonna appear magically in the middle of someone's life that you'll never meet, called the radio, then you better understand this to be a privilege. That you have a deep responsibility to conduct yourself in the presence of. I know that's a tall order for a 15-minute interview, but I maintain that standard for myself, even up to and including tonight, even though we're looking at each other. That you don't play fast and loose, with the privilege of appearing in the middle of someone's life and suddenly taking their attention and demanding something of them and having some consequence that they initially have no choice in, nor did they even agree to be engaged with you over this thing. But that's the nature of radio. So anyway, so he said, you take the serum, he said, you won't have to die. And the interviewer said to him, wow, he said, what will that mean for us? And the author guy said, well, we'll have to come up with a new name for us because human won't quite be accurate anymore. So I'm listening now. And he said, well, what would you call us then on the other side of the serum? And he said, well, you'd have to call us divine. That's the word he used, divine. And there was some cynical guffawing, and then they went on to other matters, and he didn't really pick it up, but I picked it up. And I'll just finish it off for you now. So what is he saying, and what's he trafficking in? Well, if you ask yourself, which is a good place to ask about this, if you've used the word divine in the last 24 or 48 hours, odds aren't great, but maybe you have, or you've thought the thought, or you've heard somebody else use it. And more or less involuntarily, if you were raised in anything resembling a school system like mine, your understanding of divine includes a few things that you've probably not investigated a lot. And one of them would be never-ending. Omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. Just for starters. Just to get your muscles working as a divine being. But certainly it doesn't include the end of divinity. Right? It's in the nature of divine to brook no limit, basically, you could say. I'm not agreeing that this is true of divinity. I'm simply saying this seems to be what's on offer on the cultural menu in the West. So what is it that makes divinity divine? And the answer is it doesn't die. There's other things too, but there's certainly that. Now you come to what he said. So then what's it that makes us human? The fact that we do. And all of our limitations before the big one is our practice in being human. That's where your humanity is not defeated. That's where it's relied upon. Every frailty that you are entrusted with is the opportunity for your fellows to be in on what it means to be human. And the degree to which you come to your limitations as grievances, as unnecessary restrictions, as burdens not to be borne, I think is the degree to which you shrug your fundamental responsibility as a citizen in a free country. And that's strong language, I'll grant you. But I've seen the consequences of not doing so.